this has been part of my life. I've been into this since I was 15 years old. So this isn't like a newbie coming into the world of high-end audio and wondering what that's about.
So were you into high-end audio
I was 15 years old.
before you got into music?
Oh, I started playing guitar really at 15, and that's when I bought my first stereo.
Really?
I was 15, so it's 1967. And I had like some Zenith compact thing that my parents, gave me. I think around the time Sergeant Pepper came out, so I remember playing it on some Zenith one-piece compact where you could detach the speakers and pull them apart. And I had a stereo recording. It was the first stereo album I had because everyone was listening to mono because we all listened to AM radio and it was all mono, right? So no one knew stereo was this new thing, and you also had to pay more money for a stereo record. You pay $1 more. So mono was $3.99 or $3.49. Stereos were $4.39. So you always paid more for stereo.
Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah. So why would you pay for a stereo album if you didn't have a stereo? So when we bought the Sgt. Pepper in stereo, I was able to separate the speakers and wow, man, that guitar's over here and this drum's over here. And then I started going out and buying stereo albums. Any album that said the word stereo for any reason, whether it was reprocessed, whatever, you just wanted stereo because you wanted the effect. And after about a year of that, I had money. I started selling weed at the age of 15 because my parents didn't have money and I needed money to buy guitars and stuff. I went down to a place called Liberty HiFi and I bought a pair of KLH 6s and a Sony receiver and an AR turntable with a Shure M91 cartridge because I think I read in Stereo Review magazine, right? And so I bought this, and it was I think I spent $700, which $700, which was today, by the way, $6,800 today.
Man, you were right on that too. I was starting to put in my head what it might be.
Yeah, it was there's a reason why. I'm going to write an article for one of the magazines about relative pricing and what you get for $6,800 today, because people complain about high prices. But don't forget, back then records were $3.99. Today they're $29.99. But you know what? That's proportional to inflation, and it's proportional to everything else. And when people are shocked, they shouldn't be, because cars were $3,000. Now they're $30,000, $35,000. That's the way it goes. So anyway, I had that KLH 6s and I was, just wallowing in stereo, wow, real stereo, real KLH 6s, Sony receiver, an AR turntable, and then of course, the infection of upgrading started. So I saw an ad for a Rapco SL80 arm, which is a tangential arm. Now, remember, this is the early
Is that the
days.
one that was powered by the 9-volt?
By a C battery.
C battery, okay, yeah.
So I bought it at Sam Goody's or I don't know, maybe Leonard Radio or something. It was like $200, and I just ripped off the A&R arm. I just pulled it out. I just ripped it out and threw it away, and bolted this thing onto the turntable. I think there was a template to give you an idea of where it would sit. I bolted it, had the battery, and then I used that for a while.
But for people that don't know about the AR turntable, that was not a turntable that would typically have an interchangeable tone arm.
Well, no one had interchangeable.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 1967. We're talking, first of all, in 67, you had Thorens, which was the hot, that was the person who owns a Thorens owned a Mac.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It was carriage trade stuff. It's your doctor, and your father. That's what they had.
And that's actually the turntable that I've seen that Rapco arm on before, was the Thorns.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Interesting. So that was aspirational audio. That was way out of my league. And by the way, we're not talking a lot. I mean, relative to everything else, maybe it was $600, but to us it was, like that. So, so quickly I got bored with that and threw it away. I must have thrown it away. And I bought a Garrard 0100 turntable because the arm was the thing with that. That was like a cool thing. And then I got rid of the short cartridge and bought a Stanton 681 triple E. I mean, I remember all this stuff because it mattered to me. It mattered, right? So,
yeah, it's hard to remember. It must have, because to remember the cartridge model number is very rare.
So then I got rid of the Sony and I got a Dyna kit. I was going to get a Scott receiver because I was the hot receiver, or Fisher receiver, but I got a Dyna. I got a Dyna 120 solid state, not the 70, we'll get into that later. But I got a 120 and I got a PAT Dyna preamp, and it was good. But then there was a problem with the preamp, and I had to mail it back to Dynaco to get fixed. And so a friend of mine had one that he hand wired, right? Because you could buy kits in those.
Yeah, a lot of them came in kits. I mean, could you even buy it already assembled?
Oh yeah, you could buy assembled in kits. And so I borrowed his hand wired one, and it sounded great. And that's the first time I even became aware that this matters. You know, like all this stuff matters. You know, but so you know, I was addicted to that, and I had then mine came back, and then I got bored with it and started making more money, and so I went to a stereo store and said, I got to change the whole system, like what I'm buying. You know, so I bought a JBL 100 speakers because that was the hot. It was 969 now.
Maxell ad.
You know, yeah, like all that. So I got that. And I got an Empire 598 turntable because it looked like King Tut's tomb. It was all gold plated. And they made a whole big deal that it's so good that the weight of the cartridge would be 0.01 gram. Like, so it was not going to wear out your records. You know, like completely bullshit promotion, but that was the draw. So I bought that. And I think I bought, at that point, a V15, which was the high end of the Shoreline. Bought that. And I got a Citation, Harman Kardon Citation 11 and 12, an amp and preamp. And that was like, wow, that was a revelation. You know, that took me from 69 to 70 to 71. And then, you know, I started reading the magazines, and Mac was always the gold standard. You know, Macintosh was up there.
Yeah, you said the little ad where you could put, you know, mail away and you can give your info and they'll send you the catalog.
Well, I'm in New York City, so I was able to go to stores and see all the Mac stuff. Yeah. So that was easy enough to see, but it was always like, wow, like, you know, wow, how much does that cost, you know? And eventually I bought a Mac C28 preamp, I think, and that was a revelation. And then the turntable. Then I went through BSRs, Lenkos, just because I was bored and buying them, and Dual 1019s. You know, so the point of all of this is the foundation. So when people come into this world and they're intimidated, which I get because it can be extremely intimidating. It's not intimidating to me because I grew up through it. I went through every iteration of it.
It's amazing that you can name all that. Like being a vintage audio guy myself, like I know everything that you're talking about. I know every model and you know the stories with that. And it's just amazing that you know you can tell it means something to you because you literally can name off that story. And then like going through the years, so being, you know, that was one of the things I was wondering, like, did you get into hi-fi after music or before music, kind of at the same time, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, my love of rock and roll blossomed when I was 15, and that was when 967 and Sgt. Pepper came out. And
you still have that first album?
Yeah, I still do.
Really?
Yeah.
That was your very first album?
No, I had records before that,
okay.
But that was the first stereo record. I remember saying stereo, thinking that's like a big deal. And no, I think the first records my father bought home was The First Family. It's a comedy album, Vaughn Meter, which he imitated John Kennedy. My Son, the Folk Singer, Alan Sherman, that song, Hello Mother, Hello Father. That was the number one album, 1961, believe it or not. I think they had the West Side Story soundtrack because that was the biggest selling record. That still holds the record as the most weeks consecutive number one in the entire history of the music business, was the West, still to this day.
Wow.
It was number one for, I think, like a year and a half or something like that. It was really crazy. And my father listened to Perry Como, and he was a classical music guy. And so, I mean, those are the earliest records, which, you know, I was fascinated by, but wasn't addicted to it. Rock was an addiction. And then being 17 in 1969 meant that the Fillmore East opened, and that is when people don't understand or can't possibly compute what I'm about to say. But when the Fillmore opened in 68, and every weekend was Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck, the Faces, the Grateful Dead, Country Joe and the Fish, Janis Joplin, you know, every weekend, right? So it was like not a big deal. You just went to the shows, and the tickets were $3, and if you couldn't afford the $3, during the summertime, every one of the artists that played the Fillmore played the Central Park Wallman Rink, was called the Schaefer Music Festival, and those tickets were $1 and $1.50. So in 69, I saw Zeppelin 4 times. I paid anywhere from $1 to see them in the Central Park, $3 at the Fillmore twice, and $4 in Forest Hills at the Pavilion, which was the old World Fair building, and they had concerts there at the Pavilion. But this when the prices at the Fillmore went from $3, $4, $5 to $3.50, $4.50, and $5.50, he raised the price by 50 cents. There was a riot on Second Avenue.
Really?
A ticket price riot. Yeah.
Wow.
Because he raised it by 50 cents.
Really?
Yeah. So it's a different time.
Yeah.
Right? It's a different time. So I can talk about it nostalgically, but I tell you, I'm not the only one that experienced it. Hundreds of thousands of kids were in New York, at the time. We all went to these shows. And in '69, I saw the Stones 3 times that year. And the tickets for that was the most expensive. They were $6 for those shows.
And would these sell out every week?
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, you're so high at the Fillmore, you're not paying attention to looking around to see how many tickets are sold. I mean, no one really gives a shit. You walk in, you're f***ed up, you get a ticket, you sit in your seat. You'll go to we went to the restroom in the balconies where all the drug dealers hung out. So the stench of pot was insane, So you'd walk in, you'd find your seat, you'd stumble up, you'd go to the mezzanine section where the snack bar was, and all the drug dealing was taking place there, and everyone was just trading acid for this and that, and and you just got wasted. And you went to your seat, and then you watched the show, and then there was 2 shows, 8 o'clock and 11. The 11 o'clock show ended at like 2 in the morning. Well, if the Dead played, it ended at 5 in the morning.
Oh, God.
But I can't tell you how many shows I saw at the Dead that ended at 4:30 to 5 a.m. And the doors would open, and it would be the summer, and the sun was pouring through, and you just coming down off of 20 tabs of sunshine or whatever, and So you had all that going on. And if you're a musician, you're jamming with your friends, So here's a luxury that people don't have. If you can do that every weekend without an issue, right? And you want to be a rock star, imagine being able to go seeing your star any night and then going home, standing in front of a mirror. Tonight I'm Jeff Beck. Tonight I'm Jerry Garcia. Tonight I'm Jimi Hendrix. Tonight I'm Duane Allman. Tonight, you see your heroes every night.
So do you think that seeing them every night or every weekend was the biggest influence for
100%.
you over HiFi of you becoming a musician?
Well, it's a combination of all of it, but being able to see them every night, 100%. I would come home at 4 a.m., put a guitar on, my parents would be asleep, I had a full-length mirror in front of me, and I would stand there and hold it the way the guy held it that night and pretend I was that guy. So that's how that whole thing happened. And then everybody I knew was a musician, everybody had a band. And so you could play with people all the time, which is how you learn how to really play, is playing with people, not just sitting home like they do today in front of a YouTube thing, like, oh great, look at my son, he's 12 and he can play Jimmy Page's riff. I said, well, yeah, but he didn't invent Jimmy Page's riffs, and it's nice that he's the dexterity, but is he in a band? And the answer is no, but he can do this stuff, which is fine.
You have to develop that synergy between people.
Well, yeah, if you want a career, if you just want to f*** around and be a basement Mozart, you can f*** around and be a basement Mozart. It ain't gonna do you any good. It's not paying your bills, but that's what you want to do, so be it. I always, I wanted to make money, and as a drug dealer, I was making a lot of money, and I wasn't going to be in a band until I could make a lot of money because I was already doing really quite well. And my parents kind of knew that I was dealing, and my mother was upset, but she used to say to me, if you're dealing, you're giving me 10% to deal out of the house. So I had to give my mom 10% of what I was making to deal out of the house. Because she said, I'd rather have you deal in the apartment than deal on the street and get arrested. But I was almost arrested twice. I talked my way out of 2 drug busts. I had a crazy life. The bottom line was that went on for 5 years. That craziness from 67 to 72, and then that craziness basically collapsed and burned with the whole hippie culture and the deaths of a whole bunch of my friends due to ODs, arrests. And I was watching the cesspool of destruction, which started out as hippie flower power in '67 and had wound up in a heroin cesspool. And I said, I'm going to die at this level. I had already OD'd on heroin and on every other drug. And I said, I'm going to die. My best friend was a junkie. He stashed 100 sets of hypodermic needles in my house. My girlfriend was a junkie. I was like, and I went, if I don't stop, I'm going to die. So basically, I made a decision one day and said, that's it, and cut everybody out and moved out of New York and changed my life and never did drugs after that.
Do you think music of that time influenced that culture?
Of course it did. The culture influenced that culture. Let me put it to you this way.
I wasn't there.
Let me put it to you this way. Today, you stand up on stage and you go like Trump or I love Trump, whatever. Half the people will love you, half the people will hate you. Like,
Right.
That's how it is.
That's how it
Back
is.
then, everybody agreed that Nixon was evil.
Okay.
Everybody agreed the war was bad. You go to Woodstock, 400,000 people, war, like there was no separation.
Really?
We were generationally bound by a political viewpoint. So you didn't look at a guy and have arguments about politics. It never happened. Hippies were hippies. We all believed in the same thing. It's very, very different today. Today it's polarizing. Today, you're an didn't happen back
And
in
a lot
those
of
days.
social media causes
Of course,
that, yeah.
and back in those days there was none. There was no cell phones. I mean, I went to Europe in the summer of '71 for the purposes of living in Amsterdam, which was the drug mecca of the world in '71. And I was there for the whole summer dealing. And I called my parents. I spoke to my parents once. I'm helicopter parents today, 20 texts a day, right?
Yeah.
Well, baby, where are you?
That's me. My kids are 17 and 18. That's how I feel.
You're watching them, right? Well, back in '71, you say to your mom, "See ya," and she hopes you were alive, and you come back 2 months later, and then if you want to call her, if you wanted to talk to your parents when you were in Europe, you had to go to an international payphone, which was by the passport office. And usually you had to wait online for 3 hours because everybody else was trying to call their mother or their parents. And then your parents would tell you that, person-to-person calls are very expensive. So the plan was that you would just say, "I'd like to make a person-to-person call to so-and-so," and your mother would answer the phone in New York, and the operator would say, "I have John on the phone, person-to-person call," and my mother would go, "I'm not accepting the call." Now she knows I'm alive, right? That's how the game was played. They just knew you were alive. I think I called my mother once in that summer, and then I showed back up, in September. It's like, thank God you're alive.
I remember when they had like 1-800-COLLECT back in like the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, this was way.
And, this is
like so much more.
Oh, it's so
so much more like Fred Flintstone-y than that.
Yeah, and I'd pick up do the collect call, but you would leave a recording at that point, where it's like, "Hey, record your name," and I'd be like, I'd give the whole message that I had to say in the recording before the end of the beep, so that when they picked it up, they could hear whatever I had to say. Do you want to accept? And they would, of course, not accept it. But it's interesting that it was kind of the same way, but on a much more Flintstone level.
A much more primitive level.
Yeah.
First of all, you had to put like 20 guilders into the damn phone. You keep feeding to get the international operator. Then she has that international call. It sounds so archaic, but the truth is, that's what it was at the time. You are what you are at the time you are. You don't recognize it as being old or inefficient. You go, that's life now. Back in the day, your phone number, there was no area code. You would just call Murray Hill 70349, and that would be it. Then they put area codes in because more of their phones, and then you had to put 1-800. As it exponentially went up. My parents had 3 different exchanges. We had Schuyler 4, Trafalgar 3, and Susquehanna 7. Those were our 3 phone lines in the house.
Okay.
So Susquehanna 70767, Schuyler 403, TR 39619. These were the numbers. Trafalgar's.
Just the first 3 numbers?
Well, no, but I'm just saying the exchanges had names.
Yeah, okay.
I'm only just saying the first 3, but those 7. But
Yeah.
it was like Trafalgar, Susquehanna, like Monument 40732, like that kind of stuff. And then they ditched all those names and they just put numbers.
Yeah, the far back before they had the area codes, I remember when I was a kid, it was 7 numbers. And you would have, you'd have to remember your friend's number, and you would know, you'd have to know your number, your parents' number, your friend's number. You have to remember all that stuff. Now, I couldn't tell you what my kids' phone numbers are.
No,
it's just in the phone.
Also, in those days, you had no zip codes. You sent a letter. It was just 421 Monument Street, blah, blah, blah. There was no zip codes.
How was that when traveling? So when did you start traveling like the world?
My first trip
Like
to Bermuda was 1969.
Okay.
And in those days, a friend of mine said, "Let's go to Bermuda." And I went, "Where's Bermuda?" Where is it? And he goes, "Is it?" I said, "In the Caribbean." I had no idea. He goes, "No, it's off of North Carolina. In actual fact, it's off of North Carolina." And I said, I'd never been on a plane before. You understand? I'd never been on a plane. I'd never been really out of New York City. And I said, "I don't have a passport." "Do you need a passport?" And he goes, "No, I don't think so. What do you have?" I said, "I have a library card." That's what I had. And so I went to Bermuda with a library card.
Really?
Yeah.
A lot less. I'm sure the whole experience of travel was completely different.
First of all, you could go up to the gate. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
you just go to the gate. The tickets I think to Bermuda were $85 round trip back then, and so we went to Bermuda on a kind of on a. He dared me to do it. I said to my mom, "I'm going to Bermuda." She goes, like, "Who are you staying with?" I went, "I have no idea. I'm going with David. He's supposed to know somebody." So I went to Bermuda and wound up meeting people and stayed there for a month.
Wow.
Developed really great relationships, and one of those relationships by not osmosis, but just because of the way the world turns, one of those relationships led ultimately to the audition I got for Twisted Sister because of people I met in Bermuda who then moved to New Jersey, and I met people in Jersey, and if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have met them, and therefore I would never have had the opportunity to audition for the band. So it all stemmed from that trip to Bermuda, actually.
And what year did you kind of start with? What year was the audition for
Twisted was in '72. Christmas
Okay.
week of '72.
Wow. And how was that experience? So, this the '70s Twisted Sister. This is before my time. I was born in the mid '80s. So my Twisted Sister references was like the late '80s, and in the '90s the Monsters of Rock or the Monster Ballads of Rock infomercials at 2 a.m. where we're not going to take it is on this, but in the early '70s, like how was that process for you getting into? Was that your first? It wasn't your first audition for a band.
Well, I auditioned for Kiss in June of '72 and didn't get the gig. And they wouldn't call Kiss; they were called Wicked Lester, and they were in transition from Wicked Lester. And I auditioned for them, and I've never claimed to be in Kiss. Never was in Kiss. I'd be really I can't say it 1,000 times.
Did you paint Did you paint your face for all auditions?
No, they weren't even doing that. They all looked
okay.
like they were all hippies at the time.
Okay.
But they told me, Gene and Paul said, we're changing to this new thing. Because glam had started to come in, and I was still a Grateful Dead freak when I auditioned for them. I was a deadhead, super deadhead. So, I didn't know who David Bowie was or anything yet, and that was in June of '72, and I played with them for a couple of weeks and it didn't work out. I never heard back from them. September of '72 is when I got a Bowie album, a Martha Hubel album, and a Lou Reed album for free with a subscription to a magazine, and with that came pictures of David Bowie, and I lost my mind. I went,
was
oh
he
my
like
God.
the leader of? Was he like the start of glam? Was
Bowie?
he like the inspiration?
Well, pretty much. I mean, if you look at Bowie, T-Rex, Sweet, if you're into the band Sweet, Slade, that was all the beginnings of the changeover in England. That was really kind of the, Gary Glitter. That was like the whole beginnings of all of it, and so I immediately saw the Bowie album, freaked out. Saw Mick Ronson, freaked out. Cut my hair, dyed it blonde, and decided I'm going to be a glam guy. Now I needed to find a band, and eventually, I got the audition to be in Silver Star, which became Twisted Sister.
Okay. And being a deadhead, off kind of zoning off this subject, did you ever go to a Wall of Sound show?
No, here's the thing with the Dead. So when people talk about Dead credibility, like when did you see them? How many shows have you seen them? I saw the Dead 27 times between 1968 and 1972.
Wow.
With Pigpen, okay? And I saw 9 of the shows I saw have been made into albums. So they're officially proclaimed as the greatest shows, right? I was at the Portchester shows, I was at the Live Dead recording, I went to the 4 shows at the Fell Forum, I was at Manhattan Center, I saw every show at the Fillmore, I saw them as an opening band. I saw the Dead open for 2 bands, and the Dead opening is a 45-minute set, okay? Which you can't even imagine what the Dead would do, but my joke with that is that they tuned up and said goodnight.
Yeah.
And I said that to Bob Weir many years later. I met him and I said, I saw you open for Janis Joplin, I saw you open for Country Joe. I said, but I think you tuned up and said goodnight. And he went, sounds about right. So I said, I think what happened was you came out, you tuned up, you played China Cat Sunflower, and you left. And then the second time you came out and you played like Morning Dew or something like that. But I was an ultra deadhead. I got them. In other words, I understood them. I got it. I took acid every time. I melted with the band. I understood where they were coming from. I thought Phil Lesh was the most amazing bass player I'd ever seen. I never was a Garcia fan. Still not. Not particularly for me. I didn't care for his guitar playing. His noodling was just endlessly boring and got nowhere. But God knows there's people listening to this are going to say Garcia's God, which is fine.
Probably great for the comments.
It's fine.
We'd love to hear it.
Great. But I was never thought his tone was always terrible.
Yeah.
and his scales were just repetitive and nonsensical and stupid. For me as a musician, like learning, I just went, not doing it for me. But remember too, that's like in that era, I had Hendrix, Beck, Jimmy Page, Mick Taylor, Johnny Winter, Leslie West. This was like, these were meat and potato. These were heavy players, like with great tone, and then you had this like Garcia, thin little reedy nonsense, and that was never appealing. But I loved the Dead's thing.
Yeah.
Like it was great. It was improvisational, jazzish kind of rock, and like I said, the drums two drummers were great. Phil Lesh was amazing. Pigpen was a good singer. Their vocals were terrible, but Pigpen was actually a good singer. And I was addicted to the Dead, and I saw him like 26 times on acid. And on the 27th time, I went straight. And it was like the worst band I ever heard in my life. Yeah, and I just walked out on them, and I saw him at Roosevelt Stadium. And after seeing him in every small place in the city, and I was with some friends who were uber Deadheads that day, trading tapes. This is early stages. And I halfway through the show, I went, you got to be kidding me, And I left. And then I had no intention to ever see them again. Like I had transformed from a Deadhead to a glam guy. And so I left the Dead behind, didn't listen to the Dead records, never listened to them again for like 35 years went by. And, couldn't tolerate the minute I heard, trucking on the radio, I shut the radio off. But then 3 years ago, my record label president runs their merchandise company. And he said they're playing at Citi Field. Why don't you go see? Now that they're Dead and Company, right? It's like a cover band.
Yeah.
So I went because this guy is uber Dead fanatic and can't believe that I say what I say about the Dead. Like he's mortally offended by my comments. But I'm older than him, and I saw all the shows he wishes to be. Just to be clear, all the shows. I'm 15 years older than my record company president. I was at every show he wished he could have seen. Okay. So I was actually there at those shows. Jerry Garcia gave me a tab of acid one night at the Fillmore. It doesn't get much more cred than that, right? Yeah. It's uber cred. So I can speak from cred, And so I watched Dead and Company. I watched John Mayer play. And I thought Mayer is a great player and way better than Garcia. Why? Because his solos go somewhere. Like, they begin, there's a middle, there's an end. He's an amazing player. And to his credit, he got Jerry's tone right, which is not his natural tone. Like you understand, Mayer's a blues guy.
Yeah.
So his tone normally would be raunchier, like ZZ Top kind of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This thin, reedy Garcia-ish, like lame kind of crap that Garcia plays. Mayer was doing it perfectly, and even my wife, who is not a Dead head at all, but actually saw one of their most famous shows in England when she was a college kid, was in England. She went to the Roundhouse and saw the Dead, she saw a classic show. She knows nothing about my comments. She just could care less. We're watching the show and she says to me, God, Mayer's a great player, but that guitar tone's so sucky. And I go, yeah, it's because he's copying Garcia. Exactly. I mean, she had no reason to say that.
Yeah.
She was just making a comment as a consumer. She says, why is his tone so bad? I said, it's exactly Jerry Garcia's.
And is she familiar with John Mayer outside of this?
Yeah. She respected, respected as a great player, and just was like, I said, that's how good John Mayer is. Now, I'm sure you ask John Mayer, he'll tell you Garcia is God. I'm sure he'll tell you. He'll tell you Garcia is amazing. He'll tell you that Garcia's tone's fabulous and his style is great because he probably believes it. He's certainly not going to bite the hand that feeds him. He's working for the Dead company, right? So I'm assuming he is enmeshed in Dead-ish world.
Well, I mean, that's a great skill, though, for him to be able to, like imitate.
Oh, he did I am telling you, he did a fabulous version of Garcia. Like, you close your eyes, and except the one difference, his solos go somewhere.
Okay.
Now that's my cynical response. Now, to be clear, that joke I just made where I saw him 26 times on acid, they were great, 27th time they sucked. I said that in a documentary.
Okay.
And when the documentary, which is called We Are Twisted Sister, came out, one day I get an email, and it says, hey man, saw a documentary, saw what you said about the Grateful Dead. That's all it said.
Okay.
Signed Justin Kreutzmann. And I'm thinking, drummer for the Dead is Bill Kreutzmann. So I wrote back, you wouldn't be related to the drummer. He goes, "It's my dad." I go, "I'm so sorry." He says, "No, man, that's the funniest shit I ever heard in my life." I played it for my father 5 times.
Oh
So
my gosh.
he had a sense of humor about it.
That's amazing. So after the Dead years, you get into glam,
Yeah.
which is,
Completely different.
completely different. And, I'm guessing the preparation for glam rock shows and dead type rock shows is completely different.
Well,
and I'm really curious, like, getting outside like the HiFi stuff, like what is a day in the life? You got a show.
yeah, we do 5 shows a night.
5 shows a night.
Yeah, 5 40-minute sets a night. That's how it started, 6 nights a week, right off the bat. 5 40-minute shows a night, 6 nights a week for 52. So you can just imagine that's 30 shows a month. And that's how you get good as a band, because you're a cover band. We were a cover band. We weren't an original band, so we were doing Bowie songs, Lou Reed songs, Hoople songs, some Rolling Stone covers and whatever was hit during that year. We would do Smoke on the Water. We're an American band because you were playing in bars.
Okay.
You're playing in bars, but you're looking like girls, like you're wearing. It was like total transvestite.
How long did that take?
Oh, this
to doll
once you learn how to do it, 5 minutes.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, I do my makeup in like no time.
Okay.
It got to be like automatic. I get to a gig and I know I'm on stage in 30 minutes. I can throw the shit together in 30 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, because it's just an automatic. Because it's performance art. Do you know what you understand?
Yeah.
So the difference in like a dead kind of band, hippie band, is you show up in whatever you're wearing, you plug in and you play. We were a show band. Most glam bands were show bands. So you dress the part, you look the part. And, I used to be chained to my lead singer. We had dog collars on, and that was a whole shtick, the whole thing. That was part of who we were. And when you start working all the time, it just becomes a grind. Every day is like wash, rinse, repeat. You get home at 6 a.m, you wake up at 2 p.m, you get ready, you go to the gig, you play the gig, you get home at 6 a.m. You have 1 day a week off, you may rehearse that day. And that grind just went on and on and on. That grind went on. We did 5 shows a night for the first year, 4 shows a night for the next 3 years.
And these are at different locations
Oh,
each
every
night?
night was different.
Okay.
There were
but like
clubs, so different clubs, but they were within a 50-mile radius of New York City. But there were thousands of clubs because the drinking age was 18.
would you do 5 shows at the same club
The
each
same
night?
club.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You just went on 40 on, 20 off, 40 on.
Okay.
And then you did like 40. Then you did like 45 on, 20 off, 4 shows. And then we got down to like 3 one-hour shows a night for about 4 years. And then we got down to 2 1.5-hour shows a night as we got bigger and the band got more successful. But your memory of the band from 1984 and your
Or late 80s or
late
90s.
80s, your idealization of what that life would be, and my life as the original guitar player and how I view it was, the years 73 to 82 were very interesting. And after that, it was, like when the band really hit it big, I couldn't wait for it to end because I was so sick of it. At that point, had so many years in that I would always just be looking at my watch, waiting for a show to end. Like that was it. So that's wholly unique to me.
Yeah.
And I don't expect anybody to understand it or care. Like, don't feel sorry for me. It's just that I already been through the mat. By the time our albums went double platinum, I remember the day that first of all, my father died the day Stay Hungry went platinum. So I can never really fully love that day because he died that day. But, when the album hit double platinum, 2 million, I remember sitting down thinking, how much have I earned? And I realized that the amount of hours I put in, I was making 30 cents an hour. The mathematics of the record business is horrible. It's indentured servitude. The record contracts is nothing but like legalized slave labor. So if you understand, I decided to put my focus in on business and take away from it. So I stopped really practicing guitar and took over. I was manager of the band for years, and understanding contracts became really important, and understanding how they work against the artist and how you do make money in this business. And it's a dirty, slimy business with a bunch of real scumbags all over the place, and you have to be tough in dealing with it. There's real crooked stuff. There's mob guys you have to deal with if that is the world you're in. But the record label business is just legalized thievery, and understanding contracts is very, very complicated. But I was also never drinking and doing drugs. I was totally straight. So the other guys would be in various levels of the band, but the first 10 years we were firing band members left and right for drug and alcohol use. You know, when you rehearse, when you audition for the band, I said, by the way, we don't like drugs and alcohol. Well, who the hell wants to join a band? You don't drink and party. I mean, that's
in the 70s and 80s.
That's why you want to do it.
All that you guys did.
And I go, not in this band, we don't.
Wow.
So if you want to do that, go somewhere else. You know, so you're either straight or I would say to somebody, you want to drink a beer here and there. I'm not going to run this like a Jehovah's Witness retreat. But I said, if you start fucking up, at the rate that we're working, we can't afford to lose gigs because you're getting a hangover or you're fucking up. The amount of work we were putting in, the grind of playing and rehearsing and writing and recording and playing and rehearsing and writing and recording was brutal. And most people couldn't keep up with it. And so the guys who would tell me that they were straight eventually would do meth or coke, and eventually they would just get fired because they fell apart, you know.
Wow.
And so, you know, I hired D. D was totally anti-drug and alcohol. I said, you're my guy. And my bass player, Mark Mendoza, never drank, never did drugs. You're my guy. You know, just put a straight band together. And then the record label, when they found out we were straight, said, don't ever tell people you're straight.
I would have never, ever thought this.
That would destroy that destroys your reputation. And I said to them, screw you. I don't want some kid to get high because he thinks he's emulating J.J. French. I'll tell people I don't get high. And if they say, why? I said, because I'm not telling you this because God told me. I just said, I think it's stupid. I think it destroys your life, and I will never work with a musician who gets high because why would I subject my success to some moron who's f***ed up? I'm sorry, not my thing. It's very pragmatic, but that's how I ran it. So the band was a notoriously straight band, and because we were notoriously straight, we had nothing in common with any other band, and because we had nothing in common, I refused to go to any parties and meet people because I was older than them and also straight. So it's like, I'm not going to the Playboy Mansion. Who the f wants to play that stupid game? If my record isn't a hit next year, they're not going to invite me back.
Yeah.
So I ran I was like, I did my thing. I was my character, J.J. French, created this band, and I would just go home at the end of a tour, you know, play baseball and like forget who that guy was and try to completely disconnect myself from that character, which is J.J. French. Like, that became a third-party character. Like, no one is allowed to say those words to me, and we're in my neighborhood. People just know me as John. I never talk about the band. No one knows about it. I don't want anybody to even remind me of it. I just want to go home and just, you know, grab a baseball bat, go to the schoolyard around the corner and hit the ball against all like I've done since I was 8 years old. Because you need to get away from the stupidity and insanity and total fake bullshit of the celebrity system. I thought I wanted to be famous to be recognized. I hated to be famous and be recognized. I became completely opposite of that. For my own preservation.
That's probably very difficult.
No, it was really easy.
Really?
Oh,
like
yeah.
locally?
First of all, once I decided I wasn't doing drugs anymore, you could put 20 pounds of blow in front of me, it wouldn't matter. It was never happening.
But did you have a lot of people like recognizing you around town, or was it different because you weren't in the
No, first of all, where I live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, there's actors and there's famous people everywhere. And everyone kind of in the neighborhood knows you don't walk up to somebody in the supermarket. Like, it's just generally accepted. There's so many celebrities in my neighborhood. I'll see them in the supermarket. We don't talk to each other. I mean, I'm out there, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you a story that kind of underlines this, right? Okay. I'm on tour, and I'm in Europe or something. I call my wife at the time, my first wife, and she says, do you know who lives in our apartment building? And I went, yeah, because I've lived there all my life. I know everyone. She goes, so-and-so. And I said, oh, yeah, he's in apartment 12G. She goes, don't you know who he is? And I said, yeah, he's on the Tenants Association. She goes, he's Susan Lucci's lawyer on All My Children, and he's the King of Moldavia on Dynasty. Like, that was the big show.
Oh, yeah, right.
And I went, Joel from 12G is King of Moldavia. I didn't even know what the hell that was, but I was. So now I'm treating it like he's famous and I'm nothing, right? So I come home from tour, and I'm sitting in my living room, and it was in May of whatever year it was. And, you know, in those days when the cliffhanger episodes at the end of a season, something always happens and you don't know what happens until the following September. So in this particular episode, I believe, was this wedding scene in Moldavia in which the King of Moldavia was marrying Catherine Oxenberg or Joan Collins or something. And I'm sitting in my living room with my wife, and I'm looking at the TV going, me, it's Joe. It's the guy from 12G. Like, you know, like, what? Whoa, right? So I'm really impressed because we'd be in tenant meetings, you know, like, you know, arguing with the landlord over the pipes in the building.
Yeah.
I didn't even know he was an actor. I didn't even know. Like, we never talked about that. I was a tenant, he's a tenant, we're a tenant.
Yeah.
So I think the next morning, my wife says to me, we need milk, go down to the supermarket. So it's my first time back in 8 months. I'm back in New York. So I take some money, I go to the lobby to go walk to Broadway. And there in the lobby is Joel.
Okay.
And he's carrying a laundry basket. And I looked at Joel and I went, Joel. He says, John. I said, you're a famous actor. You never said a word. Oh my God, I saw you on Dynasty. He goes, you, we're not gonna take it. So we're walking out of the building, and I said to Joel, what are you doing? He says, Audrey told me to take the laundry across the street. His wife. What are you doing? I said, Jody told me to go get a quart of milk. He said, we're just a couple of schmucks on the Upper West Side, aren't we? And that's how you have to lead your life.
You know, and I recently heard a story like that. So I'm a big wrestling fan. I love professional wrestling. That's where I get my energy from. I grew up watching that.
Well, just so you know, I saw Buddy Rogers win the very first belt in 1961.
Oh, wow.
I was at the Garden when Hulk
Garden
Hogan
shows.
beat. I was at the Garden. So I was at the Garden when the Sheik beat Backlund, and
No.
a month later when the Hulk beat the Sheik.
Oh my.
Yes, to give you an idea, I
That
go back
is-
to 1960.
That is the start
Yeah.
of that is the start of when wrestling hit big.
Yes.
That.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid, you know, that was it. I'm the same age as of the amount of WrestleManias there are, and that started in the Garden.
Yeah.
And
So I go
heard-
back to Gorilla Monsoon, the
I love
Wild
Gorilla.
Red Berry, the Kangaroos, Anthony Rocca, Argentino Apollo, Sailor Art Thomas, Bobo Brazil. I saw them all.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so we share that. Just so
That
you know.
okay, that is amazing. I heard there's a guy who's now he's a manager. His character's a manager now, Paul Heyman.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and
Well known.
he just did a podcast with Logan Paul, and in this podcast, you know, one of the starting things he said when he was a kid, he went out to a Giants game, and he went and saw Willie Mays play. And then they went back to the airport. He's there with his dad, and here comes the whole Giants team coming out. And he kind of starts marking out, and he's like, "Oh man, we got to go up and take pictures with all of them, get all their autographs." And his dad's like, he's like, you know, they're just regular guys. We're not going up to them. They're off work. Their job just happens to be on TV. They just happen to be professional baseball players, and that's what their job is. Let them have their family time. You know, they all wipe themselves and their finger breaks through the toilet paper just like everybody else. And like when you hear stuff like that, like it really hits you. Like a lot of people don't realize that. Like they don't separate the two.
Well, because we're entertainers and we create. The whole point is creating a mindset and a fantasy for a fan. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take them out of their drudge or their life and have them fantasize about who you are and what you are. And I knew early on how much crap all of that was. Like people say to me, "Do you meet this famous musician?" I care less. I appreciate musicians what they do. I don't need. I became friends with the New York Mets in 1986. I'm the only non-player in the World Series New York Mets video because I was well known as a super fan going back to 1962,
wow.
and that year in '86 I went to like 40 games, including 3 World Series games, and three playoff championship games against the Astros, and I got to meet Keith, and so I'm in the dugout with Keith and Gary Carter and all these guys, and they all want to like exchange phone numbers, and this is what I'm thinking to myself. I'm thinking, when I go to a baseball game, I become 9 years old. And I want to look at it as a 9-year-old. And if I actually have to sit in the stand and go that Keith just got in a fight with his girlfriend or that Gary's doing this, and it's going to take me away from I want to just be, when I go to a ball game, I want to be a 9-year-old. I want to be like it was when my dad took me to this day. So I said, no. Like, they were shocked. They thought I was going to be like a star thing. I said, no.
And just be entertained.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, when I do YouTube, it's it's entertainment. That's the job, to give people happiness in that time that they get to spend watching and enjoying whatever program it is, whatever character you're in, whatever the
So I've
theory
always
is.
respected that. And I'm not blown away by celebrity or anything like this. Because at the end of the day, everybody goes home alone. Or you have your girlfriend, you have one. You know what they say, when you come into this earth, there's 2 people, and when you die, there's 2 people. And everything else that you read is all bullshit. So I kind of have that kind of fatalistic view of the whole thing. I'm not particularly impressed by anything. You know, and even going to shows, I don't like going to rock shows. I've played 9,000 shows and I've seen 2,000 shows. So when people say to me, come see my band, I go, really? You know, like, I'll go when my wife wants to go because she'll want to go to a show. But the problem with me at a show is that I'm looking at it so differently than you're looking at it. Like the minute I walk in, I'm looking at the PA, the lighting.
Yep.
When the band comes out, I'm thinking, what are they going to open with? Like, where are they standing on stage? Did they hit the mark on that thing? Did they blow the lead over there? You know, look at the eyeballs between the guys. You can tell who f***ed up on that song. And it just becomes this analytical exercise. And so I say to my friends, if you insist that I go with you, don't ask me my opinion.
Yeah.
Just don't. Just enjoy the show. Don't ask me what I think because I am looking at it. And you know what? It sucks in a way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It kind of sucks in a way because you're inside baseball so much that you have that kind of opinion, you know? It's like, take this high-end show here. I've been in this business on and off. You know, I bought my first stereo when I was 15, but I worked retail at Lyric HiFi from 95 to 2001. And so all these manufacturers, I know 90% of the guys here, you know? And I walk down the hallway and, you know, and I know the inside backstories of all these companies and all this stuff. And so the thrill of the gear that I have is fun. But I also know I can pick up the phone and say, send me this, and they'll send it to me.
Yeah.
You know? Whereas other people work really hard for that money to buy that piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To buy that piece, it's gonna like blow them away. And I have the luxury of just, I want that piece. Oh yeah, we'll call it Bob, you know, the distributor, and he'll send it to you. I can't tell you how many people today, because I write for Tracking Angle, Mike Fremers.
Okay.
And so I can get any piece of gear I want for a review. Anything. What do you want? You know, we'll send it to you. It's a luxury. I happen to love the stuff. But the problem I have with this whole level of audio, this is oligarch audio now. That's really what it is. It's oligarch audio. How old are you?
I'm 40.
Okay. Yeah. 30 years ago, you go to an audio show in New York, and this is what you'd see 30, 40 years ago. The Sansui room, the Mac room, the JBL room, the Revox room, the Tandberg room, the Sony room, you know, the Klipsch room, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And you walk into these rooms, you know, and, you know, maybe the most expensive thing would be a Mac amp for like $1,200, and the most expensive speaker maybe was a Klipschorn for $800, whatever. But the point is, you could walk in, and if you couldn't afford what you heard, aspirationally, it wasn't beyond your ability to think, well, if I save for a year or two, I can own that.
Right.
It was all reasonable. It was within reason. Now, you walk into some of these rooms, and right out front, they publish what you're about to see, and they go, in this room, you'll hear the Clear Audio Statement turntable, $150,000. You'll see the Momentum Relentless, you know, $350,000 amplifiers. You'll see Wilson XVSs, you know, $363,000. You'll see, you know, Wadax or DCS, you know, streaming, $200,000. Cabling, the so-and-so cable, $80,000. The interconnect cable, $30,000. The AC power cords, $30,000. And you look at this, and you say to yourself, you come to this show because, you know, you want to come to an audio show. And you see that, and you're not buying that.
Right.
You're just not buying it. I mean, maybe if you won the lottery, you'd buy it.
Maybe.
But you're not really going to buy it. So the aspirational aspects of it are totally off the charts. And I don't know what it's like to be a consumer faced with that, because I could call these companies up if I really cared to and say, you know, I want to review the Momentums and send it to me, and I'll whatever. And they will. I don't need to keep it. The point is, you know, I'll listen to it, fine, digest it, move on, give it a...
Yeah.
But I wonder how people perceive that. I mean, that's the part that blows me away about these shows.
Yeah.
Now there's some... I was at the TIAC room.
Yes.
Very good room, because all the gear was proportionately priced. And they were explaining to me that they were priced because they want young people moving away from the Apple AirPods like that, to like get into home audio. So their integrated amps are like $2,000, and their CD players like everything was like $2,000.
Yeah.
And it was serious audio, not bullshit audio. They had integrated amps, they had separate amp and power amp, they even had D to A converters and clocks, to get to the next level, but they're all like $2,000 each.
Yeah.
So that means that with a nice pair of speakers, you could put a system together for $10,000.
Sure.
And you could change it, but it's real. It's high-end audio at reasonable prices to start you in.
And that's one of the things, like our room is like AXPONA's affordable hi-fi room. That's run by my company. I have I'm a dealer for all these brands.
Right.
And it's a lot of the brands that I carry are brands that were around in the 70s. TIAC being one of them. Like we had a TIAC dual cassette deck in the room for $500.
Right.
Like it's stuff that is affordable and reasonable, and you can build just that. Like, and whether it's a $2,000 system or a $10,000 system, whether there's steps, like you can do that. And that's, I think, what's missing. I think more of that would really help the industry.
Yeah, and also people don't understand proportionality. And like, for example, if you understand your room and you have the right speaker for that room, it doesn't have to be the biggest speaker in the world. As an example, I was moving from one room to another in my house. It was being renovated, and I had Wilsons. And I sold the Wilsons, and I hadn't figured out what room I was moving into, so I was in a temporary holding spot. I had all pass electronics, so let's say there's like $80,000 or $90,000 worth of front end. But I needed a pair of speakers just to get by. So somebody at ELAC sent me like $300 ELACs.
Yeah,
and they sounded absolutely fabulous. Like my wife walked in and went, "Whoa." I'm like, what is that? Oh, they were $399. I forgot which model, the 2.20.
Yeah, like a debut 2.
Yeah, that was exactly it.
Yeah.
And like Andrew Jones designed it. And
Yeah.
it was like, wow. And I realized that if the speakers of decent quality, what's ahead of it will make them the best they can be. In other words, I was feeding the speaker the best you could feed it, and the speaker was actually responding. You don't do the reverse. You don't put a $2,000 receiver on a $100,000 pair of speakers, because you don't do that in reverse. But you can do it that way. You could be ahead of the speaker. So people don't even understand that. So it's a basic education on what's good. So people come over to my house and they hear my reference system, which is the only reason why I say the numbers, just to give you, so it's like retail about $150,000 worth of electronics, right? So it's obviously in the top 0.1% of people own systems. So they come over, they see this, and they go, "Wow, how much is that?" And I said, "Don't ask me. I'll just play something for you, and then we'll talk." So I'll put something on, and they'll go, "Oh my God, I have never heard something that sounds like that." I said, "Well, that costs some serious money if you want that." And I said, it's kind of like if someone puts you in a Kia automobile for $30,000, nice. And then they blindfold you and they put you in a Mercedes, you're going to know. Now, whether you want to spend $140,000 on the Mercedes is another question, but you can't deny what the Mercedes gives you.
Sure.
But you may not want it, or you just may not want to spend the money. I said, I have a Sonos system in the house, perfectly fine. I have a computer system in the house that costs $2,000. It's perfectly fine. I said, this is my Maserati. On a Sunday, this is what I like. And I said, if you want me to explain to you why the speaker cable costs what it does, just what I'd say to them is, I know why everything does what it does. I know how to connect them all to give you the ultimate sound that you have.
It's like adding parts to a car. You want like add some more parts, and you want to get a little more horsepower.
But the average person doesn't care how the drivetrain's hooked up to the tires.
Right.
They just know how it feels.
Yeah.
So people come in and they go, "Oh my God." So then I'll have friends of mine and say, "Well, can you help me? I want to put a stereo together." And I'll go, "No problem. What do you got?" And they'll go, $10,000. I'll put together a great system. And you know what? At the end of the day, they're happier than me. You know why? Because I'm always analyzing this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's the problem being in this business. Like you're analyzing, whereas they're just actually enjoying the music they're playing, So I set my friend up for like $7,500. Got him a Node streamer, a Marantz integrated amp, a couple of B&Ws that were expensive but were used secondhand. And I got him a nice turntable from Music Direct, and he's a happy camper.
Yeah.
I go to the house, he's playing records all the time, and it sounds great.
Yeah.
It sounds wonderful.
Sure.
It's all proportionally correct. The speaker cables are proportionally correct. I got them from Wire World, at the right price. and he's happy, and I'm happy that I'm happy he's happy. And then he'll come to my house, and then I'll go, yeah, but I go to Michael Fremer's house tomorrow, and I'll hear a $1.5 million system, but I don't sit there and go, I wish I had it.
Yeah.
I don't. My system does what it needs to do for me in my room, and I'm happy with it. And Fremer, he gets the biggest toys and reviews the biggest toys, and it's fun to go to his house
and just experiment
with it.
stuff.
Or Ken Kessler, who's the #1 writer in England, who's a personal friend. I go to his house. If you have the luxury to go to the houses of the guys who do these reviews and hear what they hear, it's a whole other experience too.
Okay.
Because their whole reference points are so completely different. I go to Kessler's house all the time, and he's always reviewing the top of the line audio research stuff, or the DS cartridges on the top of the line SME tables, and it's a wonderful world they live in. And I get a chance to drop in and experience it, but I don't need it. And by the way, I don't know what Michael, but you can imagine if they own the stuff, they're paying pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Because the manufacturers want them to have it.
They want them to have it. They want to get it out, get the word out.
So, they're probably paying, 20 cents on the dollar or whatever. But it's beautiful stuff.
Do you see like a correlation, like you're a musician and you've been around musicians, all your life. Do a lot of musicians get into hi-fi at all?
None.
So why do you think that is?
It's a strange thing. I don't know. I'm the only high-end audio guy that I know of. I'm sure there are guys.
Sure. They got to love music.
No, I don't think they have other priorities.
Yeah.
It's a priority.
Yeah.
If that's your hobby. And if you're a newbie, let's say you have a lot of money and you don't know, and you hire a friend to help you.
Yeah.
That can be fine. There's no reason to hopscotch. You don't need to go through what I went through. You can, if you got the money, you can put together some great pieces and have a wonderful system. The difference between that and me is I went through the hell, or I went through every step and every possible layer you could go through, every iteration you could possibly get to get there. And other people just want to get there.
Yeah.
Lyric was an eye-opening experience to work at Lyric, because I worked at Lyric for the only one reason. It wasn't for the pay, because they paid a straight salary. I just said, introduce me to every manufacturer that walks in the door, so I have a connection. To this day, I have it. I said, that's more valuable to me than what you're paying me. You're paying me sushi money. I don't give a about it. But then you learn the politics of the high-end audio, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
You ever wonder why the Absolute Sound, Harry Pearson, Mike Kay? There was like a high-end mafia. I don't mean that illegal. I just mean like there were movers and shakers.
Yeah.
That made the industry, and Lyric Hi-Fi was part of that. Lyric Hi-Fi was the leading high-end store in the world, and everybody knew Lyric Hi-Fi, and everybody knew Mike Kay. Everybody knew Mike Kay, and the world of high-end audio traveled through Mike Kay, and it traveled through Harry Pearson, and it traveled through Larry Archibald at Stereophile, and through Anthony Kordsman, and now, of course, it's Robert Hartley at Absolute Sound. If you understand that, then you kind of understand what the reviews are like and why they're that. It's a whole political business.
Sure.
On top of all of that stuff, which is not worth getting into. But as a salesman, I learned all that too. And then I became very cynical as a salesman, because now I'm playing with the big toys. And this is 1995, so they were selling Goldman turntables, they were selling Jadis amplifiers, they were selling Class A, Mac, Audio Research, Levinson, the Infinity speakers, which were 100,000. Like, that was
the giant Kappas.
the big, So they had all those toys there, and we would sell them. And I remember that MIT came in to give us a lecture on their new speaker cable. This was 1996, which at the time was $12,000 for a 12-foot pair. A Heilburton suitcase was attached to the cable. It was their whatever. So they gave us a 2-day lecture, on the cable. And I'm thinking, wow, like $12,000 a speaker. About 2 months later, Mike Kay, the owner, comes in. He goes, we got new cable, twice as expensive. It's called NBS cable. It's $22,000. Now remember, this is 1997. So they had this cable. It was $22,000 for a 15-foot pair. So the owner of the company, Walter Fields, comes in to the store. And he's like, you could tell the guy's kind of like a hustler. He was like a used car salesman for Detroit, but he kind of got the speaker cable shtick down. So he walks in the store. I walk up to him. And I said, can I ask you a question? MIT was here, gave us a 2-day lecture on their cable, the dielectric material, and blah, 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 blah. What do I tell people when they ask me what's in your cable? It's $22,000. And he looks at me and he goes, if anybody asks you what's in my cable, you tell them there's a lot of good shit in that. And I said, excuse me? He goes, yeah, there's a lot of good shit in the cable. I said, that's what you want me to tell people? He said, let me ask you a question, man. Somebody comes in Lyric HiFi and they're buying a $25,000 turntable, $50,000 amplifier, and those speakers, are they buying wire from Kmart? Hell no. They're buying from Lyric HiFi. You buy a Rolls Royce, you buy your spark plugs from Kmart? Hell no, you're buying them from a Rolls Royce dealer. He said, if they're buying that, this is the best. You don't want the best? Buy second best. Don't confuse the marketplace.
Wow.
Wow. What a revelation. What a revelation. Because part of the whole high-end audio shtick, like fancy watches and jewelry, is the atmosphere of all the connected stuff that goes with it, you know, and you can oversell. And I wound up selling a lot more by talking way less.
Wow. Hey,
People
sometimes
walk
that's how
in,
it
and
is.
people just walk in, and you just kind of can qualify them how much money they got. And once you figure that out, you just bingo, you head them to this, and you make your sale. I hate to be cynical about it, but you got to sell.
Yeah, I mean, that's
You're in the
job.
business of staying
Yeah,
in. By the way, they're not buying crap, you know.
Yeah,
They're buying great stuff.
yeah. Like it's there for a reason.
It's there for a
Yeah,
reason.
yeah.
It sounds great, and they go to their houses. And usually, what happens at that level of money, their friends will come over and go, "What's that?" And they'll go to Lyric and buy it. And they don't even care.
Oh yeah.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
yeah.
my friend Larry's got that. I want that.
I want that too.
Yeah. I mean, one time Lenny said some guy came in and bought like a Jadis or bought like a Goldman or something, and he didn't own a stereo. He just loved the way the turntable looked and wanted to put it on a shelf as a piece of sculpture.
Okay.
Because Lenny goes, "So what do you got?" You know, figuring the guy has a system. He goes, "I don't have a stereo." What do you mean? He says, "I just think that looks cool."
Nice.
That's
Hey.
that was the client that Lyric had.
Wow, that's amazing. See, I didn't know you were in the sales business of
Yeah.
Hi-Fi. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on the show. It
I
means
hope
a lot.
I gave you some good stuff.
I love it. I wanted to hear the duct tape story again, but I think we might be out of town. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know,
I have a plane
He got to
I gotta
go. He's got to
catch,
go.
man.
It's all good. But I appreciate it. This was a great time. Appreciate you being on the AXPONA Insider podcast. And for the podcast, we'll see you. JJ French, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure.
To all you deadheads, don't send me letters and email me anything. You
Put
know,
them in the
like you
comments.
guys. Oh, by the way, just so you know, I have a podcast.
Oh,
the
yeah.
The JJ French Connection on Spotify. I have a lot of great musicians, producers, writers, authors, and doctors, because I happen to have a lot of disease. No, but it's a great podcast. JJ French Connection, JayJayFrench. JJ French Connection should be easy enough to remember on Spotify. And I also have a book out called Twisted Business.
Oh, we'll link them both in the description.
Because that's what I do these days. I do my podcast. I write for Tracking Angle,
Wow, okay.
Flemmer, and I do keynote speeches for business groups because
Wow.
I have a business book. I teach the twisted method of reinvention, in which I take the 7 letters in the word twisted, TWISTED, and turn it into a teaching lesson. Tenacity, wisdom, inspiration, stability, trust, excellence, and discipline, which were the rules that became the hallmark of why Twisted Sister became successful. It was not sex, drugs, rock and roll, and fairy dust. It was actually applied business techniques.
Unbelievable.
So there you go.
Well, hey, you guys got to check that stuff out. We'll link it below. Thank you so much for coming on.
All
It
right,
was a
man.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.